Yeah, I found it. So for my therapy that I selected was psychoanalytical therapy. And so a little bit of history on that is that it is a type of, well, first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it is. It is a type of psychotherapy that focuses on uncovering our unconscious thoughts and feelings to understand our current behaviors. And its main purpose is really to resolve the internal conflicts and improve mental health by bringing unconscious material to the consciousness. Um, and just a little bit of history on that is that it really all came out from Sigmund Freud, who we consider the father of psychology. He was really focused on trying to help us uncover these different aspects and really trying to explore deeper within. And a lot of the goals that he put for psychoanalytical therapy was the insight and gaining awareness of the unconscious conflicts, and our catharsis being the emotional release related to repressed experiences, finding resolution of internal conflicts, that be working with our inner contradictions and conflicts to improve our own personal mental functioning. Um, as I mentioned, the major contributor would be Sigmund Freud. He is known as the father in psychology, and he really theorized and developed the concept of psychosexual development, which he explained would occur in the stages of our oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital phases. Um, and that's where he expressed that, sorry, and those early experiences would shape our adult personality and our behavior. So he really went on to express how when you're a child and you're youth, it kind of creates a foundation, all those experiences and all those things that you kind of go through to the things you'll be pursuing as an adult. And they kind of start to live within your subconscious, which I think is really interesting because once you're an adult, you don't really realize why you do or behave or certain things may trigger you. And it really all comes back to that foundational piece. Of when you were a child, maybe there was like situations that you've completely forgotten, but subconsciously they're still living inside of you. They're still wakingly like affecting you in your day-to-day life. So many of his ideas were, of course, found to be a little bit controversial. His famous one is the Oedipus complex, which suggested that the children's experiences have sometimes may have unconscious desire for the opposite sex parent, and then they might have a rivalry with their own same-sex parent. So the son might have like he would say like the son has a desire for his mother, and he's kind of in competition with his father, or vice versa with the daughter, right? And so Freud kind of established a foundation for the psychoanalytical perspective of it all. So while his ideas are a little bit kind of crazy when you think of it like that, you can kind of see where he was going with that and the idea that it's like it might not be intentional, but subconsciously it's something that's actively happening, and we just have to pay attention to it. So for the survey of central points in theory, the two main ones I wanted to point out were free association and the unconscious mind. So when he's going about therapy, he would use one, the unconscious mind as like a basis for everything really of what he would kind of go about. And then he would use the term way of free association to do this. So in therapy with him in the initial phase, he would establish rapport and explain the therapeutic process and so sorry and assess like the issues. Of course, the next phase is where you explore the unconscious material, you resolve the conflicts, and you work through the transference and resistance. And then in the final determination phase, you consolidate the insights, address the remaining issues, and bring closure. So this really comes into hand with the unconscious mind and free association. And the reason I wanted to explain the process was because oftentimes going through this unconscious material really required the client to just open up a lot and just start going through it. And so this process is normally not a short-term process. It is not something small that you kind of go through like 5 sessions and you're done, but it was more of a long-term process where you really had to work with different issues that they were having. Maybe they would start by discussing something about their parents, and he would notice that something about them seemed triggered, or the client felt bothered, and that's where he would apply free association and let it kick in and allow them to start talking. However, once you start studying the unconscious mind, there is going to be a lot of resistance at times, and there might be even events of transference where the client might project their feelings or emotions onto the therapist, and it's really linked to their past relationships. Um, it might be rare, but it can happen that the therapist might actually start to do countertransference on their client because they feel like the emotional reactions that they're receiving are associated with something within themselves. So you kind of see how the subconscious between the therapist, I mean, the unconscious between the therapist and the client can actually come face to face kind of in between this form of therapy, but that is kind of where it is encouraged that the clients can see the different kind of things that they're going through and the phases. Um, so sorry. So there's a few strengths to this therapy, and that would be that it's very good for certain disorders, so mental disorders, especially when they're working with anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. In which case, those type of disorders are very well with this, as usually those things come foundationally from something deeper or more profound that you may be overlooking. Um, Usually affiliated with things from your childhood or things that you've subconsciously been suppressing. Another thing would be the long-term therapy. It is genuinely very good, for kind of like a longer kind of process that's going to help you deal with deeper things. So if you just want like a quick solution, this is not the therapy you want to go for, but it's really good in working with those deeper issues that you kind of have to dig through and overcome. And it's really great for relational dynamics, which really help you understand the patterns in your relationships and resolving past trauma. So maybe there is different little patterns in your life that you see on a day-to-day basis, and you just don't know how to navigate through them. They are very difficult for you to overcome. They're difficult for you to face, but that's really because it's dug deeper than what you can actually see. So it helps to go through this type of therapy because you can actually resolve it and start to recognize, hey, this actually came from something way deeper in the past than what I think is happening in my active life right now. A few weaknesses, however, again, the length of it, while it can be beneficial if you want to go through a deeper and more personal process, it can be a weakness in the sense that it's a long process. It can require years of treatment, and then that can also make it inaccessible due to the cost. Of course, more sessions mean more money, and that can be a little bit of a negative side effect people can see of it as like, yes, I'd like to go deeper, and yes, I want to overcome this. However, it's the affordability and the ability to pay for that. The lack of empirical evidence. So some psychoanalysts actually argue that it doesn't have much scientific backing to it. And they suggest that it's missing a lot of things that can prove that it's actually effective to go about therapy, the way Freud would with free association or even looking into the unconscious mind, that it's very hard to prove its overall existence. There is an overemphasis on childhood. So critics may say that it focuses a little bit too much on the past experiences rather than our current problems. They may feel it's a little bit more in touch with the past and that it could overlook the small details that are actually happening in our current day-to-day life. But for the techniques used in the application of this theory is the unconscious mind. So it's kind of contains the thoughts and memories and desires that are not immediately accessible to the conscious awareness. So something you could see that kind of plays a role in that is our id, ego, and our superego. So our id is our primitive instinctual drive. And then you have your ego, which is your reality oriented kind of mediator between the id and the superego. And your superego is your morality and society rules. So you can see how all of these kind of influence your decisions. However, when your unconscious mind might have some deeper suppressed kind of emotions, feelings, or thoughts, they are going to try to seep through. And that's kind of where your id, ego, and superego kind of try to make the best decision, but it's not always the best. You will still have times and moments where it's going to seep through. You may be triggered, you may get angry, you may lash out, or you might just feel very, very low about things. So whenever you're trying to access this unconscious material, naturally your body is so used to suppressing or using different mechanisms to cope and protect yourself from going through those feelings. So there's going to be resistance, especially in this form of therapy, where it might be a little bit difficult to actually access this unconscious material. But in doing so, it would be so rewarding for the client in order to actually overcome that rather than to continuously bottle and suppress it. And that is where we can tap into free association. So it's really where our clients are going to be able to say whatever comes to their mind without any form of censorship to uncover those unconscious thoughts. Usually once a client starts to speak, if you start to tap in and start putting in input, they are more likely to be less inclined to actually open up and say what they're truly feeling because they'll feel some form of judgment, or maybe they're just going to have their thoughts sway towards what you've said and believe. However, even though that is good and you're coming from a good point and trying to give them advice, sometimes in Freud's perspective, it would be best to take a step back and let them just speak. And slowly they're going to start saying more and more of the suppressed thoughts that they've been hiding because they feel like it's a safe and open space to discuss and express this. Next is the neutral observer. Freud really suggested that we should be the neutral observer. Us as the therapist, we don't need to offer direct advice, but rather we should provide the safe, non-judgmental space for them to continue to explore their feelings, their emotions, their thoughts, and these very deep suppressed things that they may feel were very negative or maybe don't align with what the world feels is acceptable, just so that they can truly get it out and dig really deep within. We should facilitate their insight. So we should help them uncover and make sense of these unconscious material. As for them, it can be scary. They might not know that makes them crazy, feel weird, or they might even actually think that they are a bad person for having these thoughts. But rather than letting them feel that way, we should facilitate them into encouraging them to, rather than suppressing them more, embrace them and truly bring them out so we can work on them. We should also maintain an objective and allow the client to let the material come out freely and just keep a neutral stance. Don't judge it as good, don't judge it as bad, just let it exist, just let it be. Which then brings me to the Christian critique on this theory. So Christian therapists use this technique in ways that is aligned within their faith. Um, this therapy can be applied in focusing on healing and growth. So they can apply psychoanalytical concepts in ways that support emotional health while also addressing spiritual issues such as forgiveness, sin, and grace. So when they integrate this with the Bible, some Christian therapists may adapt psychoanalytical techniques to include the biblical teachings on healing, prayer, and spiritual growth. They may encourage clients to explore how their emotional wounds relate to their relationship with God and others, kind of tying it all back together, letting them see that there is something deeper to this, that it connects to something greater than themselves, and they shouldn't feel embarrassed or hidden from it, but rather allow him to connect with them and really help them heal through this process. It's understanding the self. So despite its limitations, many Christians see psychoanalysis as a tool for gaining insight into past experiences, emotional wounds, and psychological defense mechanisms. While understanding how past trauma shapes the behavior, it can be seen as a helpful tool for emotional healing, provided that the therapy does not replace spiritual healing, but rather works alongside it to really help this client overcome this obstacle. Working with their repressed emotions, Christians may recognize the value in psychoanalysis for helping people confront repressed emotions, fears, and unresolved conflicts, all which can affect the mental health and relationships. Acknowledging emotional pain can open the door to spiritual healing and transformation. One of the biggest themes in the Bible and anything biblical really is the key of forgiveness and knowing that God will be there for you along the way to help you overcome. And in this form of therapy, once you go deep, you might recognize a lot of things that you're upset about, that you're resenting, a lot of things you might feel the need to forgive for yourself or for others. And that is where it can align so much more with this biblical perspective for Christian critique, in the sense that instead of you sitting there and shaming yourself or feeling guilt, the therapist can always imply the fact that God is there for you and apply that biblical stance in suggesting that you are not alone and they're not judging you. This was okay. You know, you can still overcome. You get a second chance. He's not going to sit here and harm you, but rather have mercy upon you and try to help guide you again to get back up. And I thought that's very beautiful in the sense that you are tying in the way in which, yes, you may have these traumas and yes, you might be resenting all this and it's difficult, but there is a way to overcome this, and that is where we can present them the Bible in that Christian perspective to help them overcome. And in conclusion, I would like to share that overall, yes, it's not a necessarily short-term therapy. However, it really focuses emphasis on the clients, and it's really shaped around how to help them change and help them overcome. And we can always integrate it with other more modern approaches, such as cognitive behavioral or humanistic techniques, to really bring this therapy to another level. However, I do stand on the idea that it can be super beneficial when they're digging into a very deep trauma that has been sitting there and they've been suppressing and they just haven't known how to overcome. It is the foundation in understanding human psychology, and it just continues to evolve into all these other forms of therapy that we see today. It really focuses on exploring those unconscious conflicts, our childhood experiences, and emotional dynamics. Even if it is time consuming, I feel like it does provide deep insight for those seeking those long-term changes. And just overall, I feel like as therapists, we can apply it even just in small ways into our other forms of therapy, just combining them and seeing how powerful it really be to help our clients. And here are my references. Thank you. Oh my God.